There's all these different ways to explain how God invades human existence. Instead of saying God will show up this way, it's more about how do you perceive / know the presence of God. Because aren't there counterfeits? I'll say it like this, and this is going to bother people. Not every spiritual experience is a godly one. You can have demonic forces, you can have evil spirits, you can have what have you. Those are spiritual experiences. So I think what we need to establish is that when it comes to encountering or recognizing the presence of God, that is a spiritual, divine encounter with the creator of the universe. And the enemy would love to counterfeit that to deceive people, won't he? And that's what he does. He sends evil spirits, he sends lying, deceiving spirits and demons, and they're presented as what have you, whatever it ends up being, and they deceive people. So know this first. Not every spiritual experience is good. Once you get that set, you're set to discern and recognize the presence of God instead of just some hyper-emotionalism, which can be at times. It depends on how you qualify the presence of God, because some would say that when their emotions are running high, or when they just ran 3 miles and they feel that kind of what they call the runner's high, or they're in worship, those feelings can be equated for some people to the presence of God. He's so close, he's so near. While I don't think the presence of God can be limited to the feelings and emotions I'm having, I do believe that they can play a role in recognizing the presence of God. And that's where discernment comes in. So how do you recognize, perceive the presence of God? I've heard people say it's this feeling of sense or something, but that definition seems arbitrary and emotions based. It does. Because then anyone can define that kind of an experience however they want. And that's why I said you can have a runner's high, you can go work out, you can, have a lot of coffee and have that caffeine rushing through your blood, and all of a sudden you're like, he's near, the Lord is here. Well, you just had 4 shots of espresso in 2 seconds. I think your body's just catching up. So when God meets people in the New Testament and the Old Testament, it is very clear. And it's not always the same set of characteristics that accompany that experience. Sometimes it's trembling and fear. Sometimes it's just this awe that takes over. Not like, it wasn't just like making a noise. AWE, awe. A sense of a holy trembling, where this person is like overcome and aware of just the magnificence and the greatness of God, Sometimes it can result in tears. You're just weeping over realizing what he's done for you and who you used to be and who you are now and how insane it is and how beautiful it is. And, I think, again, if you just explain the presence of God or measure that by your own emotional and your own emotions and feelings, well, now it becomes relative to anyone. I would say this, to answer your question, Haley, John chapter 10. And though this is about recognizing the voice of God, I think it actually perfectly translates to recognizing the presence of God. When God is near, when God is present, when God's moving, when he's doing something, when he's convicting, all those different things. And I'll tell you this, you always have the presence of God with you. Like in every circumstance, in every moment, in every single second, every microsecond of life, the presence of God is with you. So I think what you're asking, and I should have started with this, is you're more talking about not God being more near, but me being more aware of the fact that he's near. Me being more, acute to the fact that God is present. That's what I want. I want that awareness that I'm the living temple, that he's present, that he's filling me. So John chapter 10 is a good go-to. It says, the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep, referring to the good shepherd, that being Jesus. He calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. When he's brought out all of his own, he goes before them and the sheep follow him. Do you know why the sheep follow the good shepherd? Because they know his voice. This is huge. They know his voice. It's huge. A stranger they won't follow, they'll flee from him. They don't know the voice of strangers. Pause. Is that true? Because I know the voice of a lot of strangers, a lot of people that I'd rather not have leading my life and such. Well, contextually, you can explain who the strangers are and such, but knowing the voice of God means you're familiar with his voice. So, Haley, back to your question. The best way to recognize the presence of God is to grow in your knowledge of his character. Grow in your knowledge of his word, of his will, of his ways, of his gospel, of his son. This goes back to having quiet time and opening the scriptures daily to say, Father, show me who you are. Why? Because part of the reason is that I can recognize the voice and the presence of God in my life the more familiar I am with his ways and his character. And so the more that I become aware or familiar with the character and the ways of God, the easier it becomes to recognize, not just when he's speaking, but when he's moving. When the Spirit is prompting me to do something. When there's conviction present. When I did something wrong that the Lord is asking me to adjust and go and fix. So the presence of God can come in the form of conviction. There's an awareness of, I shouldn't have done that. Sometimes it's in the form of joy, rejoicing with those who rejoice, and the presence of God is so there. Or when you're worshiping and then just this magnificence takes over you. There's all these different ways to explain how God invades human existence. How God invades, not that he doesn't deserve to be here, or he's but he comes into our world and he meets with us. There's so many ways to explain how that happens. So Haley, instead of saying God will show up this way, it's more about who is God and what is his plan, what is his character, what are his ways, and that becomes part of the way that I measure, or that becomes the barometer for how I determine whether or not God is truly moving in this moment, or if I'm just having some emotional high, or if I just had too much coffee, or if there's an evil spirit presence that's trying to counterfeit the presence of God. That could for sure happen. So some people will say, well, God will never, if God's present, there will never be fear. Pause. Depends on how you define that. Because fear can be reverence, biblically, a sense of holy and appropriate trembling. It could be a sense of awe, and you're overcome, you're overwhelmed, you're just overtaken by the fact that someone so much bigger than you is present. And that's appropriate for God being near, or for me being aware that he's near. So how do you know the presence of God? Instead of being more focused on the actual presence, be more focused on the substance of that presence, the one behind that. And that's the character and the heart and the ways of God found in his word, Haley. This is the best way. I can't take you through a 10-step program to recognize the presence of God, because he's going to invade and even at times interrupt your life in so many different ways. And it's on us to be mindful, discerning, ready, prepared, and familiar enough with the ways of God to recognize that when he does meet with us. Not that, again, we are always filled with the presence of God. We collectively are the temple of God, filled with his Spirit. Everywhere I go, God goes with me. But I want that clear discernment and ability to recognize when he's doing something I need to partner, with him in. And he's inviting me to come and do or speak into, or when he's really moving in my heart, impressioning my heart to do something, or, there's a lot of ways that God meets people. And I can't tell people how they're going to meet him, but there are some universal things, some things that are going to stay true all across the board when God meets with people. It'll never lead you to sin. It'll never cause you to disobey his word and hurt people, you know what I mean? So the character of God is the primary focus, who God is. Because the feelings, the emotions, the experience that comes attached to that is great, but I'll tell you, that is secondary. That is secondary to God himself. That is not as fantastic as God himself. There are lots of questions coming in, so fantastic. We're just going to be here till 10 p.m. tonight. Someone asks, and this is a genuine question, is Mako. He says, can we make the Lord happy? Why are we so toiling to make the Lord glad? Well, Mako, it depends on what you mean by make the Lord happy. God is pleased with his people. He delights in his people because we are in his Son, and we have the righteousness and perfection of his Son. So when God looks at you, the same delight and pleasure that he has in his Son, he has that for you. He's chosen you. He favors you. He's esteemed you. He has this sense of, I've chosen you for myself. That's true all across the board at every moment, but God is not always pleased with my life. So I think, Mako, the question becomes, how can we please God with our life? Because I don't just want to walk around and go, God delights in me. I want God to delight in my life and how I conduct myself and how I speak to people and what I desire and my ambitions and goals and all that.